أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I'd like to welcome all of you in this session, and I'd like to invite Associate Prof. Dr. Ali Alwan to chair the session. And I'd like to remind everyone that we are going to have auto translation for this session. Just press interpretation button at the bottom to translate the session to Arabic. أود أن أوجه عناية السادة المشاهدين إلى أن هذه الجلسة ستكون باللغة الإنجليزية، لكن سيكون لدينا ترجمة تلقائية. يمكنكم الضغط على زر Interpretation في الأسفل واختيار اللغة العربية للاستماع إلى المحاضرة باللغة العربية. دون تأخير يسرني دعوة الأستاذ المشارك الدكتور علي علوان للبدء بإدارة الجلسة.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right. First, thank you so much, Prof. Akram, for extending the invitation to chair this session. It is a great pleasure to be part of this conference. So, inshallah, I will chair this session, and we have 5 papers that will be presented, inshallah, in this session. So, before we start the presentation, let me introduce myself. My name is Ali Amr Alwan. I was Associate Professor of Computer Science at the International Islamic University, Malaysia, from 2009 to 2021. Then I moved to Ramapo College of New Jersey in September 2021. So I'm joining you here from New Jersey. So now the time is 8 in the morning. So luckily the session, it's in the perfect timing. All right, so yeah, let me just to share with you the titles of the papers that will be presented in this session, inshallah. So the first paper will be presented by Brother Yasser Darshani.
Dr. Ali, sorry, the keynote speech will be before the session.
Before the session. Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, so before we start the session, we have here a keynote speech by Dr. وليد قادوس. He's the chief scientist at the Ansari. So the title of the speech, it will be on this one, Ansari experience with a real Islamic. I think this one for large language models, right? So, and the session, it will be in English, inshallah. So, Dr. وليد, the floor is yours. So, you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to meet you all. My name is Dr. وليد قادوس. I'm the chief scientist at a company called Anyscale. Anyscale is one of the leading companies in providing large language model-based services. And today I'm going to talk to you about a project I've been working on called Ansari, a personal project that I spend much of my time on, but also has informed my work as the chief scientist of Anyscale. So if it's okay with you, I would like to start presenting, inshallah. And Bismillah.
Go ahead. Just share your screen. Okay, we can see the screen now.
Okay, give me one moment. Okay. Hopefully, sorry, just one more moment. Right, hopefully, inshallah, you can see the screen, and we'll dive in. So my motivation for this work that I'm talking about is generative AI and the large language technologies that are coming through that really started in just 1 year ago with the launch of ChatGPT are going to affect many aspects of our life. And one of the questions that I have is, how will it affect our experience of Islam? And what opportunities are there to explore the use of these technologies to improve our practice of Islam over time? About 6 months ago, I started on a project called Ansari, and the name is meant to signify its personality in the sense that it's not intended to be a sheikh or a virtual imam or anything like that, but really is designed to be an assistant something that helps you. It's not perfect, but as much as the Ansar helped the Muhajirun when they arrived in Medina, the hope is that this is a tool that in many ways can help its users. I wanted to really share my experiences building this platform, and I wanted to get feedback from you and to stimulate further discussion, because I think this large language model revolution will be one of the biggest things that we will have to face from a technological point of view moving forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the LLM revolution, what Ansari is with a quick demo, what it's capable of, and how in the last 6 months of usage, people have used Ansari. I want to talk a little bit about the ongoing work we are doing, particularly in the area of validation. And that is a topic that I've been very fortunate that many of the members who have been helping me are on this call. And then I just want to share some conclusions, and inshallah, if we have time at the end, we'll have some questions and answers as well. So you saw that I talked about the large language model revolution, or the LLM revolution. This really started 5 or 6 years ago, but really popped into the public consciousness around a year ago with the release of ChatGPT. And what that technology does is it uses a set of new algorithms that have been developed recently called transformers. And these transformers are trained on trillions of words in multiple languages. And what has been most amazing is that they have emergent properties we don't understand. They seem to be able to reason, to use analogies in ways that we don't quite fathom how they work, but we know that they work very well. To the extent that they've shown a very, very strong performance on real-world problems. They've already passed the bar exams in many states in the United States. They've passed legal exams, business exams. And here in the United States, the SAT is the high school graduation exam, and it scored 710 out of 800, which puts it better than 93% of actual human high schoolers, right? Not only that, but within the field of natural language processing, it has kind of very quickly superseded existing algorithms. It's completely changed the field of natural language processing in areas like summarizing, question and answering, analyzing sentiments, and even machine translation. And I suspect that the translation of this presentation to Arabic is very much using these new large language model and generative AI technologies. So Ansari is a very is a way that we're trying to explore how we can use these technologies to help answer questions about Islam for Muslims. So I'm going to go to a quick demo. What you can see right now is just the interface for Ansari. You can access this yourself at Ansari.chat, and you can ask it any question about Islam that you want. You can say, are corals mentioned in the Quran? And it will then start to process that and hopefully give us the correct verses that it mentions. But this is really only scratching the surface of what it can do. As you can see here, it runs in multiple languages that are popular in our community. These are the top 7 languages that Muslim communities around the world use. And it has a memory of what's being discussed. And it can answer even more complicated questions. You know, it can answer the basic questions like, what are the pillars of Islam? But you can also ask it to do many more interesting things, like give me 5 trivia questions for a 10-year-old about Hajj, for example. And it will generate those questions and give you the answers, which is kind of an incredible capability. When we're talking about the generative capabilities and why this is called generative AI, is because it just made up that on the fly. But its multilingual capabilities are amazing. So, for example, I can say, okay, can you translate those questions to Arabic? Let me leave the typo in, because it shows you how robust these systems are. And sure enough, in real time, we are translating that same set of 5 random questions that we just made up. But I mean, so let me just talk a little bit about the capabilities. But I mean, you can even go to things like write a poem about Ahmed bin Hanbal's time in jail, right? And sure enough, it will write a poem about the situation, the menha that Ahmed bin Hanbal went through. And it will tell you the story and do it in a poetic way. I don't want to, I'm sure I haven't had a close look at its Arabic, but I'm pretty sure its Arabic poetry is not going to be very good. So let's move on. What's happening there to define this is really that we are using these large language models in what's called the chat mode. And there's three parts to that chat mode. One is called the system prompt that defines its personality. As you saw there, the user prompt is the questions that I was asking, and the assistant responses are the responses that the agent gives back. Also, these agents have the capability to use external tools. So this is an example. Ansari is an example of what is called a retrieval augmented generation agent. It doesn't just use information that's built into the LLM itself, but as you see, it will use external tools like being able to search Hadith and Quran to produce information that help it to answer questions. So the overall architecture of Ansari looks something like this. When you're using the web application Ansari.chat, that's what we call the front end. At the back, it's connecting, it's then taking the information that you're typing in and sending it to a backend that we have that's using the system prompt, using a large language model. We use GPT-4 from OpenAI because that's generally regarded as the most highly available model in the world today. But in addition, there are tools available here. It has a Quran search tool and a Hadith search tool that it can selectively decide whether to invoke or not. So if I'm asking it for trivia questions about Hajj, it doesn't really need to invoke Quran and Hadith search. But if I'm asking it, are corals mentioned in the Quran, it does indeed know that. So the system prompt component there, that's the first part that we talked about up here, is actually a very important aspect of this. And the way to think about the system prompt is that it defines the personality of Ansari. Brother Amin Ahmed, one of the founders of Vectara over here, says within GPT-4, there's like 10,000 personalities. And the system prompt is the choice of, helps you choose which of those 10,000 personalities surface. So you can see that the system prompt talks about its name, what its purpose is. It tells it to stick to the Quran and Sunnah. It tells it to be gentle, forbearing, and non-judgmental. It tells it to be careful about something that's obligatory or prohibited. So the idea here is this is the first stage. We're trying to tell Ansari, this is how I want you to behave. That sets up the large language model to answer questions. So for example, the question that we asked earlier, are corals mentioned in the Quran? The first thing that happens is Ansari makes a decision that to answer that question, it needs to do a search of the Quran for the phrase coral. And it then uses an external tool called Kalimat. This is a group of brothers that provide the API, and it returns a list of verses. And from the list of those verses, it then selects the two verses that it shows us. So this is an example of what is happening behind the scenes to provide us with the answer. The key point here is that when it comes to the Quran and Hadith, it's looking up canonical sources. One of the problems with large language models in general is what's called hallucination. They have a tendency to make things up. And as Muslims, the one area where we don't want to tolerate any kind of made up information is in our faith. So just to give a quick walkthrough of the capabilities of Ansari, and we've already touched on these, but if you want a comprehensive list, you can have a look at this address, walee.dk/AnsariCan, and that has a list with examples of these types of things. But as we've discussed, it can answer questions about Quran and Hadith. You can ask it like, hey, I'm leaving the house, what da'at should I read? You can ask it basic fiqh questions, and as well as opinions on controversial topics. Is music halal or haram, and so on. One interesting use case is that you can use it to console or remove doubt. So say you have a question like, can Allah forgive? I have committed a big sin. Can Allah forgive me? how is it possible that Allah can forgive me? It can give you the hadith and Quran to support its opinion on that. And it can even do helping you with sarf and nahu from the Arabic language. It's truly multilingual. And as we saw, it can generate ideas or trivia questions. But not only that, it can write pretty good khutbas or khatiras, which I know is a question about whether we want to use that or not. But it definitely has that capability. And you can test it out. And we actually see many people using it for that purpose. So Ansari was first released about June. And we've been continuously improving it since then. We haven't been advertising it broadly because we really wanted to make sure that we nailed the validation question as we come to that. The experiment period, so what we did though, is it's still being very actively used. In total, about in the last 100 days of operation, people have asked a total of about 8,000 questions in 3,000 conversations. So, you know, a conversation can, as you saw, can have multiple stages, and you can go back and forth. You can say, I didn't like those trivia questions, give me another 5, or whatever else you want to do. So that gives you an idea of how much people have used it. It seems to have hit a nerve. And I'm going to discuss some of the feedback we've received from the community as people have used it. So what we did is, from that list of 3,000 conversations, we took the first question. We extracted all the duplicates because people do things like say, Assalamu alaikum, or the number of times that people ask about is riba halal or whatever, many people ask them. And what we tried to do was to, and again, this shows the power of large language models. Just this morning, I finished this, which is to categorize these questions of the kinds that we've talked about. I just used a large language model and said, classify it into one of these categories. And the whole process took less than 15 minutes. So when we look by topic, we see that the topics that many people are asking about are around the fiqh, Quran, hadith, history, dua, and so on. One interesting topic consideration is there's a lot of thing in this other category. And so I really wanted to dive in to understand, why is it that 20% of the questions don't fit into any of these easy categories? And sure enough, here are some examples of how it's being used in ways that are very hard to classify. You know, people asking it to summarize Islam, or to do translations of fiqh-related words, dream interpretation, ethnic questions, and also how to explain Islam in a way that's accessible. So people are really using this in creative ways. But I think one of the interesting things is, you know, the number of people who are using it for topics like khutbah. And I haven't spent the time, but I suspect I'm going to get a peek in people using it for khutbahs around Thursday evenings. So hopefully that is helpful in that regards for the brothers and sisters. So I wanted to share some of the qualitative feedback, both positive and negative, that Ansari has received. Again, just to show us, how will these large language models affect how we do things in the future? So one example of feedback was, these are all from actual user feedback examples that people have communicated to me while using Ansari. And one person, I was surprised, I didn't tell anybody to use it at Hajj or anything, but they had Ansari, they were doing Hajj, and just having that type of system that they could ask fiqh questions about the practice of Hajj when they couldn't get hold of a sheikh or something like that, it proved to be useful. Another example was feedback from some of the users who were surprised that to answer a question, it was willing to go into things like the morphology. So you can see in this particular question, someone asked us, how many times does tarbiyah appear in the Quran? And then it says, well, tarbiyah, the word doesn't appear in the Quran, but the root word rabb and words derived from it appear very frequently. So I mean, they really like that interaction. Here's another example, you know, of a brother asking, where were the people in the cave when they made dua? And it really liked that Ansari kind of engaged. And when they asked, how do you know that they weren't outside? Goes into the details that the word used here, which is awa, is usually only used when you're hiding or with so on. And so it was able to give its explanation based on the actual Arabic words that were used. The second, so now that's the positive feedback. Let's look at the mixed feedback. The IERA is a large Dawah organization in the UK, and they sent me a set of 200 Dawah questions because they were interested in building one of these LLM agents to do Dawah, so you could talk to it. I had to generate answers for those questions, and it's currently under review. And so the overall feedback, the good parts are that it's headed in the right direction. And they also like the way it constantly refers to Quran and Hadith to explain. For Muslim audiences, I've encouraged Ansari to cite scholars to refer to Yusuf al-Qaradawi, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, or Sheikh Yasir Qadi, or Imam Nawawi, or any of these scholars, to help them make sure that Ansari stays grounded. But this more subtle point was that really when you're doing dawah, you want to direct people in a particular direction, and what we may need to do is customize Ansari specifically for dawah. But it gives you an idea of like the pluses and the minuses that we can work through. I'm just looking at the questions to make sure that there's nothing here. This feedback, Jazakumullah khair, brother Muhammad Zaki Khidr, who sent me an email as an example of one of the areas where Ansari was getting it wrong. So he sat down and started to ask it complex questions around inheritance. And he made the point that its answers on inheritance were not always 100% correct. The good news is that we have a very clear path for how to fix this, in the sense that just like we have tools for Hadith search and Quran search, you can use existing systems that do calculations of inheritance, and we can verify that it produces the correct results. But it does point to the fact that Ansari can get things wrong. One interesting thing that happened is I gave people a presentation about Ansari when in person, and one person got very agitated because they're like, when my imam was teaching me and he was giving me ijazah, he wasn't just looking at my knowledge, but they were looking at my adab and my character. And so that person was offended at that idea. But other people have expressed concern that unless Ansari is 100% perfect, how can we release this publicly? So you can see that there's a balance of concerns that people have had about this. I want to move on to what I'm spending most of my time on these days, which is, we do know that Ansari makes mistakes, but is there an objective way we can measure that? Is there ways we can set up data sets and so on that would help us evaluate that? And this is the work that I've been working on most recently. And thanks to Brother Muhammad Khair, he shared with me some of the questions that Dr. Mohsen Rashwan was making available. And looking at the first 200 questions, it gets something like 78% of them correct. This is, and I'll talk about it, but it's a multiple choice type question. For each question, there's 3 possible answers. What's happening and why this is proving to be a challenge is, as often is the case in Islam, there's differences of opinion. So what was kind of beautiful to me as I started to use this is that you can ask Ansari for its reasonings on why it gave answers. So let's go through some of the questions. The questions were in Arabic. And so the question is, this question is asking, is it allowed for someone to, is a man allowed to marry a Christian wife? And Ansari said, yeah, sure, that's okay. But the correct answer that was given was it's only allowed in certain circumstances. But then Ansari gives you the answer. It says, look, the reason that I came to this conclusion is this very clear verse that exists in the Quran. And then it also shares the opinions of Imam Abu Hanifa. So part of the question here is like, there are fuzzinesses like this. Or another example is this question, which concerns eating in gold and silver utensils. And Ansari said that's completely haram, whereas the correct answer was that it was completely halal, according to the list that was given. So, and then it gives its evidences. It cites a hadith. That hadith is correct. Like if I click on this link, it will take you to that hadith, the correct hadith. And it says, for that reason, I believe that it's haram. So even when it's making mistakes that point to potentially an area of confusion and ambiguity in the data set. So that hopefully is giving you some idea of like where things are at, how we have been developing it. What's next for Ansari? So this idea of focusing on high quality exams and evaluation to make sure that we can be confident that Ansari is giving correct answers is something that I personally care a lot about. We're actually working with an institute in Chicago called Dar al-Qasim, which is one of these Western Islamic institutes. And we're actually giving it the tests that they give at the end of subjects. So I know this is going to sound crazy, but a question I want you to think about is, can you give ijazah to an AI assistant? In addition to the existing tools of Quran and Hadith, we can, of course, add more sources of information, but tools can be more general than that. So, for example, you can add things like calculating prayer times, like you can ask it, so you can answer those types of practical questions, as well as tools for zakat calculation and inheritance. One thing that we're also working on a bit is to allow it to be more personalized. So you could tell it, I am Athari, or I am Ashari, or you could tell it I follow the madhabs or whatever, or I particularly like this particular scholar, focus on their opinions. So there's room for personalization and understanding more about users. And finally, one really interesting way things are going is, imagine that we don't just use Ansari for that front end, that web experience that you showed, but we create multiple different specialized personalities. One is strong at zakat, one is strong at dawah. One really interesting application is that, again, unprompted, several teachers at Islamic schools in Australia started telling their students to use Ansari because they felt it was a more protected experience than exposing them to something that was unfiltered like ChatGPT. And you can imagine, if you're a Muslim student, asking something like Ansari about LGBT issues is going to lead to a much better outcome than if you ask just normal ChatGPT or one of these other agents. So just to conclude, really so far we've seen a very strong positive response to the community. I think there are still some open questions about how to validate it and make sure it doesn't make mistakes. I think as a research community, as a research question, one thing that has advanced other parts of natural language processing is the construction of high quality data sets for question answering and so on. And so I'm really interested in that question. But really the other thing is that people tend to be using it. And the fact that we're getting this many queries from users and it's spreading through word of mouth and being used by people in India when I haven't directly reached out to people in India, indicates that there is a real potential here. And there is so much more that we will be able to do, inshallah. Before ending, I just want to call out thanks for some of the special brothers that have been helping me with the construction of this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I thank him, but also Dr. Muhammad Khair, Amin Ahmed, the brothers and sisters at Endeavor Pal, and everyone who's contributed by helping me to identify the errors that exist in the system. In terms of next steps, you can try Ansari out yourself. Ansari is also open source, so you can make your own version of Ansari. If you have any feedback, just drop me an email at feedback@Ansari.chat or reach out to me directly at waleed@gmail.com. Barakallah fikum. Thank you for your attention. If Brother Ali would give me a few minutes to answer people's questions, I'd be very, very happy to answer people's questions. Jazakumullah khairan for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Waleed. Jazakallah khair. MashaAllah, you did a very good work that will serve the Ummah, inshallah. And may Allah bless your effort and may Allah reward you abundantly. Well, so now we open the floor for questions or comments. So anyone has any question or want to say something about the presentation? Yeah, I think maybe Prof. Akram, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali. Thank you very much, Dr. Waleed. Just a short question. Technically, what is the difference between ChatGPT and Ansari? Is it only the data set are different or the algorithm as well?
Ansari just uses, at the moment, ChatGPT. But as I mentioned, there's the modifications from the system prompts. There's the use of Hadith and Quran in search results. And those things, the system prompt and the effort to fine-tune that makes a big difference. Obviously, as we move forward, there's a lot of opportunities, beginning with fine-tuning these large language models on Islamic datasets, and even getting to the point where we start to train them. However, we have to realize that it's a gradual thing, and current estimates for the cost to train one of these large language models from scratch are in the $100 million to $1 billion range.
Well, Brother Eric, I guess, yeah. You raise hand, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Many universities, like at Leeds University, have interest in using fine-tuned versions or specialized versions of GPT for teaching students on courses. I wonder, well, two questions. Do you think that this will be used in Islamic studies, Arabic and Islamic studies, in university courses, like at Leeds University? And secondly, how easy is it for a lecturer to simply adopt this, as to integrate it into their Blackboard teaching resources?
Two very good questions. I think it can be relatively easily integrated into existing educational material. As you saw, it kind of happened organically with secondary students. As to the idea of fine-tuning or tailoring these tools, you'd be surprised how far you can get with just the optimization of the system prompts and careful design there. Fine-tuning is actually a very tricky thing to do. And really, we should lean in the direction of adding additional sources for retrieval, adding tools, rather than jumping to fine-tuning. You know, our experience at any scale has been people don't always use fine-tuning. Well, we've made fine-tuning available to people, but not many people actually have the technical depth to use it effectively. And it only offers limited improvements.
So you can add in your own learning resources for your talk module rather
yes.
than... Right.
Yeah. So just like you had a tool for Quran and Hadith, you could add your own tool for learning materials and even texts. So for example, if you were doing an analysis of Madarij al-Salikin by Ibn al-Qayyim, you could add that as a source material and it could become an expert, I'm putting it in quotes, on say that particular book. So that's very, very possible and very, very easy to add additional sources of information there.
So we'd have to give the book to you and you could add it for us. There isn't any way for me to do it myself. Is that right?
Not currently, but again, you know, things are getting easier and that kind of adaptability is something that's on our cards. So as you saw, we have this idea of Ansari as a service, and the idea is that people could have modified versions of Ansari for their particular use cases. So while it's not off the shelf, you and I could definitely cooperate and see if we could offer a customized version of Ansari that would serve the needs of your students at Leeds.
Thank you.
And I'd actually be interested in exploring that if you are.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, next we have Professor Muhammad Zaki. Yeah, I think he has a question or, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. وليد, for this interesting speech. Actually, we have to distinguish between fatwa and fiqh. This question, which was raised in the last session, which was in Arabic, as related to fiqh, you can go to sources of books of fiqh and put that in the Ansari. While when we go to fatwa, personal information are needed. So the one who would communicate with the system would need to inform the system about many aspects of his personality. So I think we have to adapt the procedure that fiqh can be put into the system easily, while fatwa we need a lot of work and many years or probably decades till we reach the situation where we can say that fatwa can be put into AI.
Yep.
This is
Jazakumullah khair, brother Dr. Khidr, and thank you also for the feedback that you've given in the past on Ansari. I think fundamentally I agree with you that, you know, when it comes to fatwa is like another level of complexity that is much higher than this. Two thoughts on that. Number one, this could be used as a tool by scholars to give fatwa in terms of helping them find the ahadith that are relevant. That's personally something that I use a lot for. It's actually, you know, a very natural way to interact with hadith. For understanding, you know, what are the opinions of other scholars if we added those other fatwas as a source of information. So my hope is that it could even be useful to people giving fatwa rather than give fatwa itself. The second thing that we have to say is, unfortunately, many people do not have easy access to a sheikh to ask detailed fatwa questions to. I wish we in the Ummah had many more sheikhs, but you know, if you look at the ratio of how many sheikhs to individuals within the Muslim community, I think you'd be surprised if it was more than 1 in 200 or 1 in 100, right? So there's an access problem. And the question is a more junior, you know, maybe we could think of this as like a second-year Azhar graduate level, not quite there to give fatwa, but has some capabilities, is a lower quality form of answering better than the fact that it's very hard to get access to someone to give you fatwas. And that, you know, when you send a query to Islam QA or whatever, it could be months, if not years, before someone gives you an answer. So, I mean, I think it's the question you asked, your point is very, very valid. It's just there's those two reflections that I have on that question as we try to work out how to use this and similar tools in the future.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. وليد, for answering the questions. I have one more question for you. Well, so in your presentation, you shared with us the architecture of Ansari, and it seemed like the backbone of the engine for Ansari is GPT-4, right?
Yes.
And you also rooted the application with Quran and Hadith. So I want to know to what extent Ansari referred to Quran and Hadith. Is it only to support the answer generated based on the data set in GPT-4, or also use the Quran and Hadith to form the answer for certain questions? I think maybe this is the reason why there are some wrong answers. So I just want to know, I mean, how the engine internally works for Ansari. Yeah.
Right. So what happens is we make the tools available to GPT-4 and say, here are these tools. Here's a description of how these tools work. You make a decision about when to use these tools or not, because every time we use the tools, it slows down. It takes a few more minutes. And the more information you make available, sometimes it causes confusion. So if someone's asking, you know, what's the 5 pillars of Islam, maybe you don't need to refer to Hadith. You could give it the Hadith of Jibreel, and that would help. And if someone said, you know, what are the 5 pillars of Islam with the evidences from the Hadith, it would go and pull the Hadith of Jibreel and present it. But it's really left to the tool to choose when to look up Quran and Hadith. Right now, in practice, my problem is it looks up Quran and Hadith too often for questions that you don't think it would have to look up Quran and Hadith for. Right now, I'm trying to work out how to tune how often it looks up Quran and Hadith. I could tune it so I could force it for every question. You know, when was Salahuddin Ayyubi to look up Quran and Hadith? When was Salahuddin Ayyubi born? You know, it's not really going to be helpful for answering that type of question. But so far, I've seen it make very good choices generally, with a general tendency to err on the side of doing those additional searches of Quran and Hadith more often than not. One thing is, on the one side, I can see people who say, this is just a very simple version layer on top of GPT-4. And to some extent, that criticism is true. But on the other hand, it works. And as you saw, I know it's, maybe not technically that interesting, right? Like all of us would like to have fine-tuned models and our own trained models that we train on, huge amounts of text. And I know that that's the long term. But when you use GPT-4, even with all of these, quote, minor modifications, it works surprisingly well. That's been, like when I started this project, I thought I would have to do a lot more to get to a quality bar that I felt would be useful to the community. But to my surprise, even these relatively simple techniques, because of the power of these LLMs, provide surprisingly good results. So I can understand that criticism that, where's the innovation here, or this is going to be too much of ChatGPT or whatever else. But in practice, you don't see that. If you ask it about delicate questions like Palestine or LGBT issues, it gives you an answer that feels like it's coming from an Islamic perspective.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. وليد. Jazakallah khair. May Allah bless you, and we wish you all the best in your project, and may Allah make it easy for you to promote this application that serves the Ummah. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.